a man called Warwick French used to be a pastor when I grew up, and his gift really was evangelistic and teaching. And when he was at the war, Second World War, he found a coin, and this coin had the Hegera date on it, and I think it also had the Gregorian date on it. The Gregorian date was 1917, and the Hegera date was the one mentioned in the Bible. And immediately he saw it. He saw that God was talking in a whole series of prophecies, including most of Daniel's, and God very amazingly laid it out in the Gregorian calendar, and he laid it out in the Hegera calendar, the Muslim calendar, the Islamic calendar. So 622 AD is the beginning of the Hegera calendar. So 622 Anno Domini is 0 Anno Hegera. So that helps us to understand a lot in the book of Daniel, if we just know that. So I guess I'm talking about Israel, Hamas, and the end times today. We know that Jesus talked about the end times. There's a lot. The Bible actually is full of it. When you start to read it with this in mind, you see God's been talking and preparing three groups of people for the end time: the Gentiles, the Jews, and the church. And you've got to be careful when you read the Bible, because it's not all to the church, it's not all to the Jews, and it's not all to the Gentiles. And you have to discern what it's actually referring to. So when Jesus spoke about it, he gave a lot of information. Peter, of course, who was with him at the time, he hooked into it and spoke about it in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verses 19 and 20. Peter said, "So he went and preached to the spirits in prison, those who disobeyed God long ago, when God waited patiently while Noah was building his boat. Only 8 people were saved from drowning in that terrible flood." So to get the full understanding of that verse, we have to go back to Genesis and find out who he's talking about. And in fact, we have to go to a commentary that Jesus used, that Jude used, that James used, and Peter used, I think. They used a very important commentary. It was very common back in Jesus' day and well accepted and seen as the most prominent commentary on these early years, and that was the book of Enoch. We don't find it in the Bible, but it has been always right down through the ages, and particularly in Jesus' time, seen as one of the great commentaries on the early part of the Bible, and there's lots of quotes in the Bible from it. So we find out quite a lot. We'll get to that. I won't get ahead of myself, except part of that verse, it talks about Noah, but it also talks about spirits that were in prison. And, you know, if you read some of the smaller epistles, we start to find out whose spirits were in prison. And we'll get to that perhaps today. In Matthew 24, when Jesus was talking about the last days, he said, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man." Now, if we go back and have a look at that in Genesis, it says this in Genesis chapter 6. "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the earth," and that's an understatement, because Adam had sons and many sons, and he lived over 900 years, it's estimated that there were a minimum of 1 million children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of Adam by the time the flood came, and it could well be 3 times that. So it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Elsewhere in the Bible, that same description, the sons of God are called angels. And God sent angels, they were called watchers, to look after man after the fall, to keep them. It was God's good intention to have watchers look after mankind. But those watchers, at least 200 of them, were the ones that this refers to, where they saw the daughters of man, and it says that the sons of God, these angels, saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Of all whom they chose. It was a terrifying time. The book of Enoch tells us that this was just violent. It was horrible. The word wife is not the right word, but we know what the Bible's saying there. They were, they acted terribly. As a matter of fact, a lot of these stories ended up in cultures like the Persian culture, the Greek culture. If you look at the Greek gods and what they did and how they did it, it's all the same. It's the same story. This is the Bible story, but it's been polluted through other cultures. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. That, by the way, is the intention of God. Not 70. 70 was the punishment given to those in the wilderness. There were giants on the earth in those days. The children of those unions between angels and men were called Nephilim. We translate that as giant, but the Hebrew is Nephilim on the earth in those days. And strangely enough, you don't have to look very far on YouTube to find archaeologists digging up huge skeletons, 10, 12 feet, 14 feet, huge bones. In many places of the world, it's worth having a look if you've never done so. So these Nephilim were in the earth in those days. And also afterwards, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the Nephilim, the mighty men who were of old, men of renown, not in a good way. They were violent. They taught these spirits, these angels that were given to mankind to look after them, also brought technology. We hear people saying that it must be aliens who built the pyramids and some of these huge structures, because no technology that we've got today could do it. These were the ones that brought that technology. They were able to do these things before the flood. So the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This was an evil situation. Not one good thought amongst these people. It was evil continually. It was violent. I'll read that to you. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast. There was a reason why he said beast, which we'll go into maybe one day. Every creeping thing and every bird of the air, for I'm sorry that I've made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's who we want to be, don't we? we have found grace in the eyes of the Lord. We're a chosen people, a royal priesthood. We're a light on a hill. Almost literally tonight. But so this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation. I'd love to go into why all this says what it says, but I'm going somewhere tonight. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Anyone like to hazard a guess as to what the Hebrew is for violence? Hamas. That's the word, Hamas. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And shortly after, Noah's great boat floated away. So in the sequence of Jesus talking about as it was in the days of Noah, the last thing that was mentioned before they floated away was Hamas. It was a violent place. Hamas means terrible violence, brutal violence. And Hamas, when it's announced in Israel and they know the Hebrew, they know exactly what they're up against. Brutal violence, unspeakable acts, things that God had to take the world down over. It was so violent, so corrupt, so terrible that the flood came, and Noah and his family were the ones that were perfect before the Lord, and they floated away into safety. I believe in the rapture. I'm a pre-tribulation rapture. I do believe that myself. I don't think there's any way you can argue against that, but some people do, and I'm not going to get too worried about that. Some people believe we leave this world in the middle of the rapture, and some people believe we leave it at the end. And if you want to stay, you're welcome. I'm out of here. But Noah left before the judgment, but only on the same day. So it says, Peter said, God had long suffering towards the earth. He was trying to help people. He was trying to get them saved, we would say. Anybody could have got on that boat, but they scoffed him. They sure wanted to get on when the water started rising, but God closed the door. It said not Noah, it said God closed the door. So I just thought that helps put a little bit of Matthew 24 into perspective and what we're looking at in the world today. Now, I'm going to have a go at this, and I wished I had my projector or a whiteboard or something, and if I don't do a good job of this, then I might have to put this into notes so that you can chew on it. But I'm back in Matthew 24. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. So when you see this series of words, abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, we need to know, because it says whoever reads, let him understand. It's very important. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them who are on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. So today I'm not saying that it's the end of the world or anything like that, but I think what we're saying is you can trace this spirit and how it works and what God's idea about it is. So let's go back to Daniel that Jesus quoted, and it says, at that time, Michael is a great angel, probably the main angel. He's a seraph, part of the seraphim, There are at least four creatures that we read about that we don't learn much about: cherubim, seraphim, cherubim, and Nephilim. So Michael was a seraph. He was also an archangel, and he's a strong angel. An archangel is an angel that has access to God continually in the throne room. So Michael was one of those. Gabriel was one of those. And they are assigned. I think Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken, went to talk to Mary. Yeah. And told her about the great announcement that she would be having Jesus. Michael often is talked about when it comes to changing principalities over nations. He was the great prince who stands watch over Israel. He has that as a role. When Daniel was praying against Persia, we read that two of these great angels came, Michael and Gabriel, I think again, and they fought and they helped each other. And these are the angels that when we pray about nations are commissioned by what we pray to go and change things that are affecting our world and are anti-Christ. So it says, at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. So Israel, one of those three groups. Now you can't confuse them, otherwise you get worried about God being partial. God has a role in the Word of God for Gentiles, Jews, and the church. And so Michael is over Israel. He has a role over Israel because Israel is God's timepiece. Israel is God's people. We are grafted in, and they turned their back, and that gave us as Gentiles an opportunity to be grafted in. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be Christian. It's a Judeo-Christian belief system that we have, and so God looks after them, and He has a plan for them, and it's rolling out as we listen to the news every day. So He's the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. So that's when Jesus comes back. He comes twice, doesn't he? And you know that He comes in the clouds and the saints are gathered to Him, and there's a period of time goes by, and then He comes with His saints and He touches down on the mountain in Jerusalem there, and it splits in half. So this is what that's talking about. And these are those who are wise. They shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, he's talking way back, you shut up these words and seal the book until the time of the end. Well, I don't think we can argue that we're now reached that time. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked and stood, and there were two others, one on this riverbank and one on the other riverbank, and there was the original one. There were three of them here. So listen, then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, or two more, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, that was the original man. Who was that? Michael. Who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? So he said to Michael, who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. Let's just unravel that for a minute. The Hebrew is for a moed, for two moeds, and half a moed. And we read in the Bible and we'll get to this, that a moed in this particular case is 360 years. So a time, 2 times and half a time, that's 3.5 times, and 3.5 times times 360 is 1260 years. So that's just worth keeping in mind. We'll maybe get to that. And so there's going to be that period of time, 3.5 times. And then he said, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. Now that's not well translated. I'll give you a better translation. When the power to scatter the holy people is over, these things shall be finished. Has the power that scattered the holy people finished? Well, it has, and I'll show you. The word scattered is linked to scriptures further back in the Old Testament where God said to Judah, who were dwelling in the south, that when the kingdom split and you had the northern tribes of Israel and you had the southern tribes of Judah, and they were told, God said, if you love me, if you serve me, if you keep my word, I'll look after you and bless you. But if you rebel and leave me out of your life, then I will scatter you. For, in that particular case, he told them how long for. And that's what this is referring to. In this particular instance, we'll talk about 3.5 times, because what scattered them also took away the sacrifice in Jerusalem and replaced it with an abomination that maketh desolate. So that was 1,260 years of that. Originally, when God scattered them first, he said, I'm going to scatter you not for 3.5 times, but for 7 times. And they were. And they were taken away in 604, 603, 604 BC. And 7 times is 2,520 years. And he said, after that time of scattering, you're going to come back to your homeland. And 604 plus 2,520 is 1917. And they came back into their homeland under the Balfour Declaration. So God knows what's going to be in the paper tomorrow morning. We need to understand what's happening so that we can pray. God's not against the Palestinian people, but he's for Israel. And you know, if there's plenty of Palestinians that are rich and blessed in Israel. There's plenty. They're not all separated and Islamic. So Daniel said, although I heard, I didn't understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, you go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. That's now. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly. And last week we learnt that God sometimes has no legal way of helping someone because they do wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from that time, or from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Not 60, but 90 now. So this is not 3.5 times specifically. We'll get to that. And I think someone here is just thinking, I wish I bought my pad and pencil. And I think to get this, you really have to see it. So maybe I will have to send out some notes on this at some stage. But blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. So no doubt right now Daniel's just resting, waiting to come back to earth with the saints. So in Daniel 11, just back a verse or two, it says, and forces shall be mustered by him. Who's him? It's the Islamic leader, Caliph Omar it was actually. And they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They'll take away the daily sacrifices, and they'll place there right on that spot, the abomination of desolation. So they're talking about the temple site where the sacrifice was, and right now, over that very stone, that very place, is the rock of the dome, or the dome of the rock, sorry, the dome of the rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's not actually a mosque, literally. It's actually a building that was built to honour this particular site. The Islamic people say certain things happened to Muhammad on that site. But actually it's the place where Abraham sacrificed his son, or was about to. It's the threshing floor of David. It's an amazingly historic site. And there it is, right in Jerusalem. And in 1967, another set of prophecies that ended up in 1967, many of them do, told us that the Jews would get that temple site back, and they did in the 6-Day War. And they've traded it for peace, access to it, but they literally got it in 1967 when the Bible said they would. In Daniel 12 and 11, let's just read that again. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So back to Matthew 24, for then there will be great tribulation such as never been before, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's Christ, or there, don't believe it. Christ is a word that means an anointed one. For false Christs, false anointed ones, and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So Daniel 12:11 mentions 1290 years, and this passage is speaking of Islam, and so God uses the Hegera years. 1290 Hegera is 1873 Anno Domini. And in 1873, that's the 1260th year of Islam, or the Moed, 2 Moeds, and half a Moed. So it's exactly right that this is the 1260th year, 1260 years and 3.5 Moeds. 1260th year of Islam, and it's also 1290 Anno Hegera, and Daniel says 1290. He said, he starts this prophecy off. He said, watch 1290. You with me? In that year, the Turks, who controlled Israel and called it Palestine, allowed the first trickle of Jews to return to Israel. It began in 1873 our time. Right on time. Just a trickle, just a few, under the Turks, a few trickled back into their homeland. And it was the end of that 3.5 times of Islam, the very thing, the spirit, that put the abomination that maketh desolate right in the Holy Land. God gave it time, but there was a time when this began to be finished, and it was 1873 when it first started. Then this number 1897 begins to emerge, because we're told that we need to wait till this particular time, and Caliph Omar overran Jerusalem in 637, and if you add 1260 days or 3.5 times, you come to 1897. And that was the very day, the year that Zionism was founded, the movement that's designed to bring Jews back into the land. So that was a very important thing to God, that Zionism was raised up and began a worldwide movement to bring Jews back into their homeland. And then we get to 1917 in this prophecy. In other prophecies, 1917 emerges all over the place. But here it says, blessed is he that waits till 1335 in the prophecy. And 1335 is again in the Hegera calendar, but in the British calendar, in the Western calendar, the Gregorian calendar, it's 1917. So God is putting it here so that even Muslim people reading this can say, I get this. This is actually history rolling out, and it's the fulfillment of the oath. There's a word in the Bible often used, just in English we read it as the oath, but it's actually the sevens, because when people made an oath they repeated it 7 times, but it also means 7 times, 7 moeds, 7 times 360, 2,520 years. The Jewish return began as a trickle. God gave the date. It was bolstered by the Zion movement, Zionism. God gave the date. And when they went back in and it was officially given to them under the Balfour Declaration in 1917, God gave that date. So we are looking at the spirit, the same spirit. You say, what is it about Hamas? It's Islam. That's what it is. It's a spirit that drives them. It's the same spirit that's been scattering them, that brought the abomination that makes desolate. And God, as far as he's concerned, it's finished. It's finished. Does he love those people? Absolutely. Does he love Palestinians? 100%. He's using this as a clock to show the world that he means business and what he says is true. Israel are his people. We had nothing to do with that. That he chose them, and so he will look after them. There is an angel over Iran, and we see how it tried to hinder in Daniel. If you read when Daniel prayed, the Lord said to him, I heard you on the first day that you prayed, but this angel, the one that's over Persia, Iran, hindered me, and so I had to delegate 2 major officers from my throne room and their armies to go and deal with that, and it took a bit of time, but they dealt with it. And so we're dealing with not just things on the ground. We're all waiting for Israel to go in on the ground, and they will, and they'll clear that place out, and Hamas will not exist. But there's a much greater battle, and that's the one that we can be in, the prayer battle. Pray for Israel. The Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the Palestinians that they find the Lord. There'll be people praying. The Lord will be revealing himself to people with good hearts. Don't worry about that. Many Muslims have dreams at night, visions during the day. In Indonesia, a whole classroom saw Jesus, and all these children were on their knees just crying and praying. He'll do what he can if we do what we can. And so let us not look at this thing as a world event that's a catastrophe, which actually in one sense it is. It's Hamas, it's violence, it's unbelievable, sickening violence. But let us take the opportunity to really pray, to intercede, to be the man and woman that stands in the gap, like we said last week. We can be the ones who modify and nullify, if necessary, the judgment that's coming on people. If we will take this, it doesn't take a lot of people. We were talking about this during the week, Jonathan and I, about does God answer prayer more if there's 10 people than if there's 1? That was a question we had to look at. That was the question. Yeah. And so, it doesn't take a lot. We can change things. We can pray that God reveals himself to the Palestinians. And I listen to Netanyahu and some of these ones. Their roots are so deeply into this. This is where they get their drive from. This is where they get their energy from, that they know there's a God that looks after them. But they haven't got the heart of Jesus. We have, and we can pray and we can make a difference. And I believe this week is going to be a huge week on the news. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to say a lot of things. But I think if we're the ones praying, we really are down where the rubber meets the road, and we can make some changes. Amen.